Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift off to the sounds and sensations of enduring a rather unpleasant situation. Imagine, if you will, being trapped high in a rugged Balkan mountain range, the chill air biting at your exposed skin, surrounded by an unseen enemy that prevents any hope of escape. The world outside is a murmur of distant, muffled conflict, sometimes a sharp crackle that makes you flinch, more often just a low, persistent hum of unease. You are cold, profoundly hungry, and every day is a gray, monotonous struggle simply to exist. It's a bleak picture, isn't it? Historically, sieges were just awful. People resorted to eating everything from rats to shoe leather. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this scenario in real life, and certainly not without some truly unappetizing meals along the way. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You huddle deeper into the threadbare blanket, the rough wool scratching slightly against your chin. The stones beneath you are perpetually cold, leaching away what little warmth your body manages to generate. The air smells of damp earth, wood smoke from dwindling fires, and something else, something metallic and fearful that seems to hang in the air during long periods of quiet. The sounds of the siege are your constant companion, not the immediate, terrifying sounds of battle right outside your door, thankfully, but the far-off echoes, the occasional distant boom that rattles a loose pane of glass somewhere nearby, the rustle of unseen movement in the trees on the slopes above. It's a waiting game, and waiting is exhausting. Your stomach growls, a low, insistent rumble that has become the soundtrack to your days. Hunger is a dull ache, a constant, unwelcome presence that saps your energy and focuses your mind almost entirely on the next meager morsel. You dream of food, impossibly rich, warm, plentiful food that seems like a fantasy from another life. Survival in a situation like this quickly becomes about resourcefulness, about making do with absolutely nothing. And in this particular chilly mountain-ringed pocket of misery, you've stumbled upon what feels like a miracle, or at least a temporary stay of execution from the gnawing hunger. It's something that sounds almost laughably basic, even boring, but in your current state, it's the most precious thing you possess: smoked goat broth. Yes, broth. Not a hearty stew overflowing with vegetables. What vegetables? Not roasted meat. Where would that even come from? But thin, savory liquid made from the bones and scraps of a smoked goat. It sounds underwhelming, doesn't it? Like a meal a cartoon character might eat when they've hit rock bottom. But here now, it is everything. The fact that you have smoked goat broth at all feels like a minor victory against the overwhelming odds. Goats are agile creatures, notoriously difficult to catch, and even more difficult to keep quiet in a besieged environment. And smoking requires not just fire, a dangerous giveaway of your position, but sustained fire in the right kind of wood. Someone somehow managed this feat. Maybe it was a goat that wandered too close before the siege tightened its noose. Or maybe it was a daring, desperate hunt into the dangerous no man's land between your meager defenses and the enemy lines. Historians still argue whether such risky forays for resources were a calculated strategy or pure acts of desperation during sieges like this. Either way, the result is this small, smoky, life-sustaining treasure. Think of it, smoked goat. It conjures a specific, rustic image, doesn't it? A whole animal hung over smoldering wood, the meat slowly infusing with that distinct, pungent aroma. In more civilized times, smoked meats were often a way to preserve food without refrigeration, a practice dating back millennia. The Romans, for instance, were pretty keen on preserving food for their legions on the march, though I doubt many of them were rationing out smoked goat broth in freezing mountain hideouts. It's a far cry from the charcuterie boards you see today, isn't it? No fancy olives or artisan cheeses here, just the raw, smoky essence of survival. The broth itself is not thick or viscous. It's a thin, brownish liquid that holds the memory of the meat and bones it came from. You can smell the smoke, of course, but also an earthy, slightly gamey scent. It's not a smell that would win any culinary awards, perhaps even a bit off-putting in normal circumstances. But right now, it smells like salvation. It smells like calories, however few. It smells like warmth for your insides, however fleeting. It's a quirky tidbit of survival history, how people in desperation would boil down literally anything to extract nutrients and calories. Bones, hides, roots, even grass sometimes. The idea of focusing on the broth from a smoked goat adds a layer of specific, almost absurd detail to your predicament. It's not just survival, it's this specific, weird flavor profile of survival. Like, welcome to the siege diet, featuring artisanal smoked goat bone water. Your entire existence has narrowed down to the essentials: breathing, staying hidden, and waiting for the designated time when you are allowed your small ration of this liquid gold. It's a focus that pushes everything else to the periphery. Fear, boredom, despair. Everything fades slightly when the promise of warmth and a few calories approaches. The physical sensation of hunger is paramount, but the psychological comfort that this broth represents is perhaps even more significant. It's a symbol that you haven't been entirely forgotten, that there is something left, that total collapse hasn't arrived yet. It's not much, but when you have nothing, a little bit of something feels like the whole world. You cling to this prospect, this ritual of receiving your tiny cup, as the anchor in a sea of uncertainty and deprivation. The siege outside may rage or settle into a tense quiet. The mountain winds may howl or whisper. But inside, your focus remains locked on the simple, profound promise of smoked goat broth. The focus on the broth intensifies as the designated time approaches. It's not a clock on the wall, of course. Those are luxuries long gone or broken. It's an internal clock, a rhythm set by the gray light filtering through cracks, the shift change of the few centuries still able to stand watch, and the deep, aching throb in your gut. This waiting is a performance art of endurance. You curl tighter, trying to minimize the surface area exposed to the biting air. Every slight rustle outside makes you tense. Every distant sound prickles your skin. Your body feels heavy and sluggish, powered by fumes and the sheer stubborn refusal to give up. You try not to think about the hunger too much, to push it to the background, but it's like a persistent, low-frequency hum you can feel in your bones. It's less a sharp pang and more a vast, empty void that everything else revolves around. Your tongue feels thick, your mouth dry despite the damp environment. Thinking about the broth is a small comfort, a tiny candle in the perpetual twilight of your existence here. You imagine the warmth spreading through your chest, the subtle smoky flavor. You know it won't be filling, not by a long shot, but it will be. Something warm, something with a hint of savory richness that hasn't touched your lips in what feels like an eternity. This anticipation is almost as important as the broth itself, a psychological tool to keep despair at bay. Like waiting for payday when you're totally broke, but instead of money, it's slightly smoky warm water. Winning, historically the psychological aspect of scarcity and rationing during sieges, was just as crippling as the physical lack. Maintaining morale was crucial and often incredibly difficult. Simple rituals, like the distribution of food rations, became hugely significant events, focal points in an otherwise chaotic and terrifying existence. It wasn't just about the calories, it was about structure, order, and the reassurance, however faint, that someone was still trying to keep things together. You can feel that weight of expectation settling over the small group here as the time draws near. You can hear others stirring around you, a symphony of creaks, groans, and low murmurs. Everyone is waiting for the same thing. There's no pushing, no shoving. Hunger has a strange way of imposing a grim sort of civility. Or perhaps it's just that no one has the energy for conflict. Plus, causing a ruckus over a few sips of bone broth seems counterproductive. It's not exactly worth getting into a brawl over something that amounts to glorified hot water, is it? Though don't get me wrong, if someone tried to steal yours, you'd probably find a surprising burst of primal rage. It's amazing what a lack of food does to your inner pacifist. The ritual of receiving the broth is simple to the point of being stark. There's no fanfare, no ceremony, just a quiet, stoic figure who appears at the appointed time, carrying a dented metal pot and a stack of chipped cups. You line up slowly, shuffling forward, eyes fixed on the pot. The smell, faint at first, grows stronger as you get closer. That unique, smoky, slightly gamey aroma that is now inextricably linked with hope and survival in your mind. It's a smell that wouldn't get a second glance in a fancy restaurant, probably just be politely ignored. But here, it's the scent of life itself. Each person receives the same meager portion, measured out with a small ladle into their waiting cup. There's no option for seconds, no bargaining. You hold out your cup, feeling the cold, rough surface against your numb fingers. The figure pours, a thin stream of brownish liquid filling the cup maybe a quarter of the way up. It's warm, and the heat radiates faintly into your hands. You clutch it like a priceless artifact. This isn't just a cup of soup, it's your lifeline for the next however many hours until the next ration. A quirky tidbit about historical diets in desperate situations. People would often boil and reboil bones or tough hides multiple times to extract every last bit of collagen, gelatin, and mineral. This produced a thin, nutrient-poor liquid, but it provided some minimal energy and hydration. This smoked goat broth feels like it's gone through at least a couple of these reboiling cycles, honestly. It speaks to the extreme lengths people would go to survive. Boiling bones might sound gross, but hey, beggars can't be choosers, and collagen is good for, well, maybe not your skin here, but definitely your survival odds, marginally. Historians still argue whether rigid, equal rationing systems, while fair in principle, were always the most effective method for long-term survival in protracted sieges, or if they sometimes led to faster overall depletion of certain essential nutrients compared to more flexible, need-based distribution, though that was often impractical to manage. You don't really care about the debate right now, though. You only care that the warm cup is in your hands. You find your way back to your spot, carefully cradling the precious liquid. You don't drink it immediately. There's a strange compulsion to savor the moment, to appreciate the having of it before the consuming of it. You just sit there, letting the faint warmth seep into your palms, watching the almost translucent liquid. It's a tiny beacon of warmth in a cold, dark world, and soon you'll finally taste the boring, miraculous flavor of smoked goat broth. You raise the cup to your lips, hands still slightly trembling from the punt and the residual anxiety of waiting. The steam, barely visible in the dim light, curls towards your face, carrying the smell you anticipated for so long. It's not quite the same up close, it's more complex, a bit earthier, definitely smoky, and yes, undeniably goat. A smell that under different circumstances you might find challenging, but here it's the scent of possibility, however slim. You take the first sip, it's warm. That's the immediate, overwhelming sensation. A gentle warmth spreading across your tongue, down your throat, and into the hollow space in your chest. The taste, it's thin, watery, mostly. The smokiness is there, a ghost of flavor, and a faint, gamey undertone that whispers of its origin. It's savory, yes, but in the most understated, apologetic way possible. It's not rich, not comforting in the way a proper soup or stew would be. It lacks body, substance. It's the ghost of broth, the echo of a meal that happened a long, long time ago to someone else. You hold the liquid in your mouth for a moment, trying to coax out more flavor, more something. There isn't much to find. It's just warm, slightly smoky water. After all that waiting, all that anticipation, this is it. It's a little anticlimactic, isn't it? Like waiting ages for a package, finally opening it, and finding, well, let's just say it's not what you expected. You paid for gourmet. You got slightly seasoned tap water. But hey, at least it's warm, right? Small mercies. You swallow. The warmth lingers for a moment. A small, fleeting comfort in the biting cold. It doesn't fill you, doesn't satisfy the gnawing hunger. It's a momentary truce, a brief pause in the endless campaign of your body against itself. You take another sip, then another, faster this time. There's no point in savoring it really, not when there's so little to savor. You drink it down steadily, feeling the liquid disappear, the warmth fading almost as quickly as it arrived. Holding the empty cup, you feel a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that the waiting is over and you have received your ration, however meager. Disappointment that it was, well, just that. You run your finger around the inside of the cup, hoping for some rogue bit of something, anything, but there's nothing. Just the faint, slightly oily film left behind. This broth isn't about pleasure or nourishment in the traditional sense. It's about hydration, about introducing some kind of liquid that isn't just plain cold water, if you can even find clean water, and maybe extracting the absolute bare minimum of minerals or amino acids boiled out of the bones. It's a lifeline, but a very, very thin one. Historically, during prolonged sieges, people often resorted to consuming liquids that were far from palatable or nutritious by modern standards. Think of soup made from boiled shoe leather, ground up bones, or even bark. The simple act of having something warm and liquid to put into your stomach could stave off dehydration and provide a small, temporary feeling of fullness, even if it offered negligible caloric value. This smoked goat broth, thin as it is a luxury compared to some of the things people have historically forced themselves to consume just to survive. It's got some flavor, right? Leather soup probably just tastes like, well, I assume it tastes like failure and foot odor. This is better than that. The feeling in your gut doesn't change much after drinking. The vast emptiness is still there, perhaps slightly less aggressive for a few minutes, but it quickly reasserts itself. It's like trying to fill a swimming pool with a teacup. You know, you made the effort, the water is in there, technically, but the overall level hasn't exactly risen significantly. Still, every little bit counts, apparently, or so you tell yourself. A quirky tidbit related to siege diets. During the siege of Leningrad and what he was due, one of the few things available was a type of industrial glue made from animal products. People would boil this glue down and consume it as a sort of soup or jelly, desperate for any calories or protein, even though it was incredibly difficult to digest and likely offered very little actual nourishment. Suddenly, that watery goat broth doesn't seem quite so unappealing, does it? Survival has a way of redefining your culinary standards. Historians still argue whether the psychological boost derived from receiving and consuming even the most meager rations in a siege environment had a greater impact on overall survival rates than the minimal physical sustenance these rations provided. Was it the calories or the confirmation that resources were still being distributed that kept people going? You suspect it's a bit of both, but right now, holding the empty cup, you're leaning towards the confirmation. The physical hunger is still very real. You settle back down in your spot, pulling your thin blanket closer. The brief warmth from the broth is already dissipating. Your body remains cold, your gut remains empty, but for a few minutes you weren't actively waiting. You were doing. You were participating in the ritual, receiving your portion, consuming it. It was a tiny sliver of normalcy, a moment of structure in the chaos. It's a small victory, a quiet act of defiance against the siege. You drank the broth. You are still here. And for now, that has to be enough. You close your eyes, the image of the empty cup lingering behind your eyelids. Waiting again. Waiting for, well, you're not sure, but you're still waiting. The warmth from the broth is already a memory, a fleeting ghost on your tongue and down your throat. Now all you feel is the cold. It seeps in from the floor, from the stone or concrete walls, finding every gap in your thin layers of clothing, settling deep into your bones. This is your space, your refuge, your prison. It's a cramped, airless box carved out of the mountain's base, or perhaps just a reinforced cellar beneath a building that might not be standing tomorrow. There isn't much room to stretch out. Not really. You sit or lie curled up on the cold, hard ground, maybe with a threadbare blanket or a piece of scavenged cardboard for minimal insulation. Every position quickly becomes uncomfortable, your limbs protesting, muscles cramping from the lack of movement and the constant tension. The air is thick and stale, carrying the scent of damp earth, dust, and, Well, a general human closeness that hasn't seen fresh air or soap in a while. It's not exactly the aroma you'd bottle as a mountain retreat candle scent, is it? More like, existential dread with hints of mildew. You try to breathe shallowly sometimes, as if that might somehow filter the air or make it less used. It doesn't work. Each breath is a reminder of the confines, of the sealed-off reality you inhabit. Outside, the world continues its chaotic, violent existence. But inside here, time stretches and warps. Hours feel like days, days like weeks. The only markers are the patrols distributing meager rations, like the broth you just had, or the terrifying, jarring sounds of the siege itself. Most of the time, it's a low, persistent hum of anxiety, punctuated by sudden, heart-stopping noises. A distant boom that shakes the ground faintly, a closer crackle of small arms fire, and the worst, the whistle, the screech, the incoming sound that sends everyone scrambling, pressing themselves flat against the floor, praying it lands anywhere but here. This constant, low-level fear is exhausting. It's not the adrenaline-fueled panic you might expect from Hollywood movies. It's a dull, persistent ache in your chest, a knot in your stomach that never quite loosens. Your senses are on high alert, even when you're trying to rest. Every creak, every distant noise, every rustle in the darkness outside your small space is a potential threat. Is that a patrol? Is that someone trying to break in? Is that the first sound of something about to explode right above you? Your mind cycles through the possibilities, none of them good. You wouldn't exactly call it restful sleep. It's more like involuntary unconsciousness forced upon you by sheer exhaustion, constantly teetering on the edge of waking dread. It's like trying to relax in a hammock made of tripwires. Historically, people in sieges and conflict zones have utilized whatever shelter is available. Basements, cellars, and sometimes purpose-built underground tunnels or bunkers became primary residences for prolonged periods. These spaces offered protection from shelling and gunfire, but they were often overcrowded, lacked sanitation, and were breeding grounds for disease. The simple act of surviving the day often meant retreating into the earth, away from the direct line of fire, hoping the enemy's aim or resources would falter before they found or destroyed your hiding spot. It's a stark reminder that for many throughout history, home wasn't just a building. It was wherever you could find a bit of earth or stone between you and danger. A quirky tidbit about civilian life during sieges. During the siege of Paris in 1870 to 71, people got creative with their limited space and resources. Since traditional mail couldn't get through, they famously used hot air balloons and carrier pigeons to send messages out of the city. Even more bizarrely, when food supplies ran critically low, the Parisian zoo animals were eaten. High society restaurants offered menus featuring elephant trunk, antelope terrine, and bear cutlets. It makes you wonder what kind of exotic meats might end up in a broth if this siege lasts much longer. Hopefully they run out of rats first. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of prolonged confinement in dark, cramped, and dangerous spaces during sieges caused more lasting trauma than the physical deprivation and direct threats of violence. Was it the shelling that broke people, or the endless, suffocating wait in the dark? You're getting a first-hand education on both, and frankly, it's a tough call. The physical discomfort is constant, but the mental toll of hypervigilance and claustrophobia in this little box feels like it's slowly eroding something fundamental. You shift position again, trying to find a spot where the cold doesn't bite quite so hard, where your back doesn't ache quite so fiercely. There isn't one. You're stuck here, waiting for the next ration, waiting for the next scary noise, waiting for something, anything to break the monotony of this anxious inertia. It's a strange form of survival, isn't it? Not a grand adventure or a test of physical prowess, but a test of patience, endurance, and the ability to simply be uncomfortable and afraid for extended periods. It's less Rambo and more professional waiter in a very bad restaurant. You close your eyes again, trying to block out the visual confines, focusing instead on the sounds. The distant rumble of artillery has become a familiar, almost mundane background noise, like city traffic used to be. You can differentiate between types of fire now: the sharp crack of a sniper rifle, the heavier thud of a mortar, the rapid-fire chatter of a machine gun. It's a macabre soundscape, the soundtrack to your confinement. You listen, you analyze, you assess the risk, all while trying to convince your body to relax, to conserve energy, to just sleep. Good luck with that. That small amount of smoked goat broth, a fleeting moment of warmth and flavor, has done little to quell the persistent ache in your stomach. It was enough to briefly coat your insides, a ghost of sustenance, but the hunger is back. A low, constant hum beneath the anxiety and the cold. It's not the sharp, demanding pang of skipping a meal or two back in your old life. This is a deeper, more fundamental emptiness. It's the kind of hunger that feels like it's settling into your bones, a gnawing awareness that your body is running on fumes, rationing every last calorie it can find. The rations are infrequent and unpredictable. Sometimes it's a ladle of thin soup, mostly water with a few scraps of root vegetables or pulses. Other times it's a small piece of hardtack, dense and flavorless, requiring significant effort to chew and swallow. Today it was the broth, which felt almost luxurious by comparison, even if it was mostly liquid smoke and a rumor of goat. You savored every drop, licking the inside of the cup clean, trying to extract the maximum possible value from it. It felt like an act of defiance against the scarcity, a small rebellion against the siege's relentless pressure. You think about food a lot, not just the next ration, but food from before. The taste of fresh bread, warm from the oven, the simple pleasure of a ripe piece of fruit, the sheer abundance of a supermarket aisle, a place that now seems like a fantastical dream. You find yourself mentally cataloging meals you have eaten, running through recipes in your head, conjuring scents and textures that are impossibly distant. It's a strange form of self-torment, indulging in these culinary memories when reality offers only the bland, the scarce, and the uncertain. Historically, food, or the lack thereof, has always been a critical factor in the outcome of sieges. Besieging armies would deliberately cut off supply lines, knowing that starvation could be as effective a weapon as cannons or swords. Cities under siege developed incredibly resourceful, or sometimes desperate, strategies to find food. During the siege of Leningrad, 1941-1944, during World War II, which was one of the longest and most brutal sieges in modern history, the official daily bread ration dropped to as low as 125 grams for civilians, made from whatever could be found, including cellulose and other non-traditional ingredients. People ate wallpaper paste, boiled leather, and hunted stray animals. The calorie intake was often catastrophically low, leading to widespread death from starvation and disease. It underscores just how fundamental the need for food is and how far people will go when faced with its absence. A slightly quirkier, though still bleak, tidbit about siege food comes from the Siege of Malta in 1565. The Knights of Malta, defending against the Ottoman Empire, were forced to eat their cavalry horses. While this sounds grim, they apparently developed recipes to make the meat more palatable, including drying and salting it. It adds a whole new meaning to the phrase feeling like a horse's backside, doesn't it? Though given the broth you just had, you might be willing to try salted horse if it was on the menu. Finding extra food around here is almost impossible. The ground outside is too exposed, too dangerous. Any potential sources, wild greens, maybe a desperate attempt to find rats, shudder, would mean venturing into the line of fire. Besides, this area has been picked clean long ago. Anything remotely edible, anything that doesn't shoot back, has been consumed by others just as desperate as you are. You are entirely reliant on the ration deliveries, which makes the people who control them wield immense power. Your survival is literally in their hands, doled out in small, insufficient portions. Historians still argue whether the nutritional content of siege rations or the psychological stress of constant hunger was more detrimental to the long-term health and morale of besieged populations. Was it the lack of vitamins or the ever-present icky in your gut that truly broke people's spirits? You're getting a masterclass in both, and honestly, they seem to work together quite effectively to make you feel utterly miserable. The physical weakness compounds the mental fatigue, and the constant craving makes it hard to focus on anything else. You try to distract yourself from the hunger. You listen to the sounds outside. You adjust your position for the 100th time. You try to remember the lyrics to a song from your childhood. But the hunger is always there, a low-frequency vibration in your core. It makes you feel weak, vulnerable, acutely aware of your body's basic needs and the terrifying difficulty of meeting them. It strips away the layers of modern comfort and reveals the raw, ancient engine of survival. Find food, stay safe, reproduce. Less likely in these conditions, let's be honest. Sometimes you dream about food, vivid technicolor dreams of overflowing plates, of endless buffets, of the simple act of opening a refrigerator and choosing whatever you want. Waking up from those dreams is particularly harsh. The contrast between the dreamt abundance and the real-world emptiness, a cruel joke. It's like your subconscious is just laughing at you, saying, "Hey, remember this? Yeah, well, tough luck." This hunger is a constant reminder of your precarious position, of the siege's tight grip. It's a form of control, a weapon as potent as any explosive. And all you can do is wait, conserve energy, and hope that the next ration, however meager, arrives before the hunger becomes truly unbearable. You've learned to appreciate every single calorie, every drop of liquid, in a way you never could have imagined before. Smoked goat broth? You'd drink a gallon of it right now if you could. Anything to make this feeling stop, even for just a little while. Even that faint memory of smoked goat broth is now fading, replaced not just by the return of hunger, but by the ever-present awareness of your physical surroundings. Or rather, the distinct lack of sturdy, reliable surroundings. You are in a structure of sorts, yes, but calling it shelter feels optimistic at best, slightly delusional at worst. It's more of a collection of walls and a roof that haven't entirely collapsed yet, offering protection mostly from the rain and perhaps disapproving glances, but not much else of consequence. The sounds outside are a constant, low-grade symphony of anxiety. Distant cracks of sniper fire. You've learned to distinguish the sharp report of the rifle from the delayed, softer impact, and the deeper, more ominous thud of mortars or artillery landing somewhere, hopefully not too close. The impact sends a shudder through the ground, a vibration that travels up through your worn boots and makes the dust motes dancing in the rare shafts of light bounce erratically. Sometimes there's a whistle beforehand, a sound that everyone involuntarily tenses up at, holding their breath until the impact confirms it's not this building. It's like the universe is playing a cruel, high-stakes game of duck, duck, goose, and you're always goose. Your current location is a testament to the ongoing, relentless nature of the siege. The walls are scarred, patched with whatever materials could be scavenged. Bricks, concrete chunks, sometimes just wooden planks nailed hastily over holes. There are cracks you can see daylight through, gaps where windows used to be, now boarded up with salvaged doors or reinforced with sandbags that are themselves starting to fray. The roof leaks in several places when it rains, creating persistent damp patches and the faint, unpleasant smell of mildew. It's a structure that feels less like a home and more like a weary boxer, still standing, but definitely on the ropes, absorbing blow after blow. You crave a sense of true safety, that deep-seated feeling of being enclosed, protected from the elements and the dangers outside. But that feeling is an impossible luxury here. Every wall feels thin, every corner potentially exposed. You are always mindful of where you position yourself, instinctively avoiding walls that face outwards or rooms with large, unprotected openings. It's a constant, low-level stressor, this awareness that at any moment, that dull thud outside could become a deafening roar, and your fragile shelter could become a pile of rubble. It makes sleep difficult, this ingrained need to be alert, to listen, even when your body is screaming for rest. Historically, the effectiveness of fortifications and shelters has been absolutely crucial during sieges. Cities and castles built with thick stone walls, well-designed ramparts, and secure gates could withstand bombardment and assaults for months, sometimes years. Think of the formidable walls of Constantinople, which protected the city for centuries against countless attacks until gunpowder artillery became sophisticated enough to breach them. The ability to withstand physical assault often determined the success or failure of a siege. Conversely, inadequate or damaged shelter left populations incredibly vulnerable, not only to direct fire but also to exposure to weather, which could be just as deadly over time. A quirkier historical tidbit about finding shelter during conflict comes from World War II, where civilians in bombed cities became incredibly adept at improvising safe spaces. People famously used underground/subway stations in London as massive bomb shelters, but others found refuge in unlikely places: disused tunnels, cellars, even reinforced coal bunkers. There are stories of people setting up entire makeshift homes, complete with furniture and even gardens, in courtyards or on rooftops if they were deemed safe enough, deep underground or within the sturdiest parts of buildings. It speaks to the human ingenuity in finding any form of refuge when faced with existential threat, though admittedly, none of those sound particularly appealing as a permanent address. Finding a genuinely safe spot within the structure is a perpetual challenge. You've tried different corners, different rooms. The cellar is probably the most structurally sound, being underground, but it's damp, cold, and cramped, and the air feels thick and stale. Upstairs might offer a slightly better view, not that you want one, and fresher air, but it's much more exposed. So you find yourself moving around, seeking the Goldilocks zone, not too exposed, not too miserable, a zone that likely doesn't actually exist. You just pick the least bad option for the moment, knowing you might have to scramble for cover if things escalate. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of bombardment or the psychological impact of constant threat was more devastating to besieged civilian populations. Was it the physical destruction that killed more people, or the pervasive, soul-crushing fear that eroded morale and led to despair and illness? You're experiencing both simultaneously, and it's hard to separate the physical danger from the mental toll it takes. The vibration of a distant explosion isn't just a physical shockwave. It's a reminder of your vulnerability, a jolt of adrenaline that keeps you wired and exhausted all at once. You find yourself staring at the ceiling sometimes, tracing the cracks, wondering about the structural integrity. Is that load-bearing? Could that beam hold? It's a fascinating, if slightly morbid, new hobby. Much more exciting than, say, competitive birdwatching, but significantly less relaxing. You imagine engineers back in your old life, with their fancy blueprints and safety regulations. They'd probably take one look at this place and faint, or maybe condemn it and build luxury flats on top, because that seems to be how the world works. This constant sense of physical insecurity is draining. It's hard to relax, hard to truly rest, when you know that a sudden noise could mean immediate danger. The shelter offers a bare minimum of protection, just enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to make you feel safe. It's a limbo state, trapped between the deadly outside and the precarious inside. And all you can do is hope that whatever hits next isn't aimed right here, and that these weary walls have just a little more fight left in them than you feel you have. As you sit here in this weary structure that offers more suggestion of shelter than actual protection, the pervasive emptiness in your stomach is a constant dull ache. It's a hunger that goes beyond just needing a meal. It's a deeper, more fundamental need that your body communicates in 1,000 subtle ways. A slight lightheadedness when you stand too quickly, a general listlessness, a mind that keeps circling back to thoughts of food like a moth to a flickering, unattainable flame. And in the midst of this persistent gnawing, sometimes your mind, bless its resilient but slightly masochistic nature, offers up a memory that is simultaneously a comfort and a cruel reminder of what you lack. It's the memory of the smoked goat broth. It wasn't long ago in the grand scheme of things, but in the landscape of constant hunger and uncertainty, it feels like a lifetime. You can almost feel the rough ceramic cup in your hands, the slight warmth leaching into your cold fingers. Remember that? The way the steam curled up, carrying that distinctive, slightly gamey, smoky aroma. It wasn't a fancy smell, certainly not like some artisanal smoked paprika broth you might find in a trendy restaurant. It smelled of survival, of necessity, of something pulled from very little. Bringing the cup to your lips, the first sip was revelatory. Not because it was gourmet, absolutely not. It was thin, perhaps a little greasy, definitely salty, but it was warm and it had substance. It wasn't just water, it was calories, however few. It was the warmth spreading through your chest, pushing back the cold that seems to cling to your bones no matter the temperature. It was the taste, a complex mix of smoke, salt, and that underlying earthiness of the goat. A taste that registered not just on your tongue, but in your very core. A small message of fuel received in a system running on empty. It was a moment of genuine, unadulterated physical relief. A temporary ceasefire in the war your body is waging against starvation. Thinking about it now, it wasn't just the food itself, was it? It was the context. It was a moment where the immediate, crushing pressure of hunger was momentarily lifted. It was a chance to focus on something other than scavenging, hiding, or waiting. Maybe there were others around, sharing the meager warmth and the precious liquid. Maybe there was a brief, quiet conversation, or just the shared, comfortable silence of people finding a tiny bit of respite together. Those moments, fleeting as they are like tiny, precious jewels scattered in the rubble of siege life. They stand out precisely because they are so rare, so unexpected. It's like finding a $10 bill in an old jacket pocket, but instead of money, it's a brief, warm hug from the universe. Historically, food has always been a primary target and a powerful weapon during sieges. Besieging armies would aim to cut off supply lines, destroy crops outside the walls, and starve the defenders into submission. The ability to store food, ration it effectively, and find supplementary sources within the besieged area was often key to survival. The Roman siege of Alesia, for instance, saw the Gauls under Vercingetorix eventually surrender largely due to starvation, despite their initial strong defensive position. It's a brutal but simple truth of warfare, and they starve the enemy, and their will to fight, or simply to exist, withers. A slightly quirkier historical tidbit about food during hardship comes from various periods where people got incredibly creative with limited ingredients. During the Leningrad siege in World War II, blockaded citizens developed recipes using whatever they could find. Wallpaper paste, made from cellulose, was reportedly used as a thickener, and they even ground up pine needles to make a vitamin C-rich tea. Necessity truly is the mother of invention, especially when your pantry consists mostly of dust and desperation. It makes you wonder what bizarre culinary creations you might eventually resort to if this goes on much longer. Perhaps a daring dish of fortified lint crumble or mystery root surprise. Appetizing. The memory of the broth is potent, not just for the taste, but because it represents a state of being that feels increasingly alien, a state where you weren't primarily defined by your hunger. It was a moment of fullness, of satisfaction, however temporary. And contrasting that with the current state, the constant hollow ache, the obsessive thoughts about food, the way you notice every discarded wrapper or potential scrap on the ground. It highlights the depth of the deprivation. It's not just physical hunger, it's a mental and emotional drain too. You crave not just the calories, but the feeling of being nourished, of being cared for, even by something as simple as a bowl of smoky, thin broth. Historians still argue whether the quality of rations or the psychological impact of prolonged scarcity had a greater effect on troop performance and civilian morale during long campaigns or sieges. Was it the lack of nutrients that weakened them most, or the crushing knowledge that supplies were dwindling, that there was no relief in sight? For you, experiencing the civilian side of a siege, it feels inextricably linked. The physical weakness from lack of food contributes to the psychological despair, and the despair makes it harder to find the energy to seek food. It's a vicious downward spiral, and memories like the broth are just tiny, upward nudges against that relentless pull. You can almost smell it again if you close your eyes and focus. That smoky scent mixing with the damp, dusty air of this makeshift shelter. It's a phantom scent, like a ghost of a meal past, and it serves its purpose, perhaps. It reminds you that food exists, that warmth is possible, that brief moments of simple comfort can punctuate even the most miserable existence. It's a fragile thread connecting you to a time that feels increasingly distant, a time when a simple cup of broth wasn't a monumental event worthy of permanent etching into your memory, but just a cup of broth. Now, it's a benchmark, a high point in a culinary journey that mostly involves variations on not eating. Makes you appreciate airport food, doesn't it? Who knew watery coffee and a stale croissant could feel like a feast? This memory, while pleasant in its details, leaves you feeling the hunger even more acutely when it fades. It amplifies the current emptiness, underscores the bleakness of the present reality. It's a reminder of what was and a painful illustration of what isn't. And that, perhaps, is the true weight of this memory, not just the taste of broth, but the full, heavy flavor of loss and longing. That memory of the broth, potent as it was, eventually recedes, pulled back by the insistent gravity of the present. And as the vibrant phantom taste and smell fade, the other senses reassert their dominance. You become more aware of the absence of things, the absence of warmth, the absence of comfort, and perhaps most noticeable in the deep hours of the night, the absence of the normal symphony of a living city. Under siege, the nights are defined not by noise, but by silence, punctuated by sounds that carry far too clearly through the stillness. Listen now, really listen. Past the gentle hum of the fan you might have on, past the soft sounds of your own breathing, try to hear the quiet of this besieged city night. It's a profound, heavy quiet. The usual traffic noise, the distant sirens, the chatter of late-night revelers, the rumble of delivery trucks, all gone, vanished. What's left is something primal and unsettling. The wind whispers through shattered windows and hollowed-out buildings, a mournful, constant sigh. Bits of rubble occasionally shift, a small cascade of dust and brick that sounds unnervingly loud in the stillness. Somewhere, perhaps just outside your makeshift shelter, you might hear the soft, skittering sound of rats, emboldened by the lack of human activity and the abundance of, well, opportunities. Charming, isn't it? Nature finding a way, even in urban decay. They're like tiny, furry cleanup crews, only much less sanitary and significantly more unsettling. Then there are the mechanical sounds, the distant, persistent thrum of a generator, providing precious, rationed electricity somewhere further within the city's protected zones. It's a sound of life, yes, but a mechanical, strained one, utterly dependent on dwindling fuel reserves. Or maybe, just maybe, if the conditions are right, you can hear the faint rhythmic clang of something being worked on, repaired, maintained, a vital pump, a water pipe, a defensive barricade. These are the sounds of the city clinging to existence, tiny mechanical heartbeats in a body that's shutting down. But the most significant sounds are those that come from outside the walls, from the besieging forces. The low, almost subsonic rumble of distant artillery, like thunder that never quite arrives. Sometimes closer, a sharp crack, followed by the whistle of a mortar round, then the dull thud of impact. Each one sends a tiny, involuntary tremor through you. You try not to flinch, try not to tense up, but your body has learned this language of violence, and it reacts instantly. You learn to differentiate the sounds, the outgoing reports that sound like a sharp cough, the incoming rounds that sing a high, terrifying note as they fall. This is the city's lullaby now, a brutal, percussive beat set against the backdrop of silence. Historically, the sounds of siege have been a defining feature of life within besieged cities for centuries. Catapults flinging stones, siege towers groaning into place, the rhythmic battering of a ram against a gate. These were the soundscape of historical sieges. During the Siege of Tyre by Alexander the Great, the constant noise of construction as Alexander built his causeway out to the island city must have been a relentless auditory assault on the defenders, a constant reminder of their impending doom. Contrast that with the Siege of Leningrad, where the silence between bombardments became its own form of psychological torture, amplifying the sense of isolation and dread. The sound environment of a siege isn't just noise, it's information. It's a constant pressure, a narrative told in booms and whistles, in ominous quiet. A slightly quirkier historical tidbit relates to attempts to counter the sounds of siege engines. There are accounts from medieval sieges where defenders would try to drown out the sound of tunneling beneath the walls by making their own loud noises inside. Banging drums, shouting, anything to confuse the attackers trying to listen for digging. Imagine the scene: Two groups of people, one outside trying to dig quietly, the other inside trying desperately to make enough noise to stop them. A bizarre, deadly game of sonic hide-and-seek played in the dark earth. It makes you wonder if the rats scurrying outside right now are coordinating their movements based on your attempts to breathe quietly. Probably not, but it's a fun, slightly paranoid thought for 3 a.m. The quiet is often worse than the noise. The noise, at least, is active. It tells you something is happening. The quiet is pregnant with possibility, with unseen threats. It allows your own thoughts to become deafening. It allows the sounds of your own body, the gentle thump-thump of your heart, the gurgle of an empty stomach, the soft rush of blood in your ears, to become prominent. And in that quiet, your mind tends to drift to the things you'd rather not think about. How long can this last? What happens when the generator fuel runs out? What happens when the water stops flowing? The silence is fertile ground for anxiety to grow. Historians still argue whether the constant psychological pressure from bombardment or the slow grinding attrition of resource scarcity had a greater impact on the morale of besieged populations. Was it the sudden violent shock of an attack that broke people, or the relentless everyday stress of hunger, cold, and uncertainty, amplified by the ominous silence? For you sitting here, it feels like they work hand in hand. The silence allows the anxiety about scarcity to fester, and the sudden sounds of violence confirm your vulnerability and the constant danger. It's a relentless cycle of quiet dread and sharp terror. Sometimes you hear voices too, distant shouts, maybe a dog barking nervously, human sounds, but distorted by distance in the night air, stripped of context. Are they military? Civilians? Are they in danger? Are they communicating something vital? You strain to hear, to understand, but the sounds are too fragmented, too faint. They're just ghosts of human presence in the emptiness. A reminder that others are enduring this too, scattered like embers across the dark city. These fleeting human noises are both a comfort and a sorrow. Comfort because you're not entirely alone. Sorrow because their isolation mirrors your own. Like hearing your neighbor cough through a thin wall, slightly annoying, but also a sign of life next door. The quiet settles back in, thick and heavy. The sounds you heard fade, leaving only the wind and the occasional shift of debris. It's a lonely soundscape, but it's also in a strange way predictable. You learn the rhythms of the night, the frequency of the shelling or lack thereof, the periods of deepest quiet. And predictability, however grim, offers a tiny sliver of control, a minuscule sense of understanding in a world that feels utterly chaotic. It allows you to relax, just a fraction, to let your guard down from the constant, acute awareness that the daytime demands. This is the time for minimal movement, for maximum stillness, for listening to the story the city tells in its whispered, broken voice. The quiet doesn't just settle around you, it seeps inward. It fills the space that the external world used to occupy, the space where you process sounds and sights and smells. Now, with those external inputs drastically reduced, the focus shifts. It turns inward, onto the landscape of your own mind. And honestly, it's not always the most cheerful place to visit, especially at 3 a.m. during a siege. If your mind were a theme park, this section would be the Hall of Existential Dread, conveniently located next to the House of Hungry Stomach Rumbles. Enjoy the ride. The scarcity isn't just about goat broth or fuel or clean water. It's also about internal resources. Patience is scarce. Optimism is virtually extinct. Emotional reserves are running on fumes. You find yourself easily irritated, easily disheartened. Small setbacks feel like catastrophic failures. Stubbing your toe on a loose floorboard feels like the universe personally despising you. And the worst part? You know it's irrational, but you can't seem to muster the energy or the mental fortitude to shake it off. It's like trying to run a marathon after months of starvation. The will might be there, but the physical means are utterly lacking. Your mind is equally malnourished. This constant state of high alert, interspersed with periods of profound boredom and helplessness, is a brutal psychological cocktail. It's like being trapped on the world's least fun roller coaster. Sudden drops of terror, long grinding climbs of anxiety, and no predictable end. The adrenaline spikes are exhausting, but the lack of stimulus is almost worse. Boredom in a life-or-death situation is a strange, corrosive force. Your mind, deprived of its usual distractions and comforts, starts to gnaw on itself. You replay conversations, second-guess past decisions, as if choosing the right toothpaste 6 months ago had any bearing on this. And worst of all, you project endless, grim scenarios into the future. Historically, the psychological toll of prolonged siege is well documented, though often overshadowed by the more tangible suffering of starvation or disease. Defenders and civilians alike face crushing levels of stress, fear, and uncertainty. Accounts from the siege of Paris during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71 describe widespread depression, anxiety, and even instances of what we might now recognize as trauma-related symptoms among the populace. The constant shelling wasn't just a physical threat. It was a relentless psychological weapon, eroding morale day by day. It's a stark reminder that while bullets and bombs might cause the most immediate damage, the invisible wounds of fear and hopelessness can be just as devastating over time. You notice the small things becoming disproportionately significant. A tiny crumb of bread found in a pocket feels like finding buried treasure. A brief ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds feels like a divine blessing. Conversely, a dripping faucet or a loose shutter can become maddeningly irritating, amplified by your frayed nerves and the pervasive silence. It's as if your sensitivity's dial has been cranked up to 11, making every minor sensory input feel overwhelming, good or bad. You're living in high definition, emotionally speaking, and it's exhausting. A slightly quirkier historical tidbit regarding the psychological effects of siege involves collective hallucinations or strange beliefs that sometimes emerged in isolated, stressed populations. There are anecdotal reports from various historical sieges of people seeing things that weren't there, developing unusual superstitions, or becoming convinced of bizarre rumors, almost as a way for their minds to cope with the incomprehensible reality they were facing. It's like the mind, desperately seeking patterns and explanations in chaos, starts inventing its own reality show, complete with strange plot twists and guest appearances by invisible creatures. You catch yourself sometimes almost expecting something utterly absurd to happen, just to break the monotony of dread. Maybe a talking rat will offer you investment advice. You wouldn't be that surprised at this point. Sleep, when it comes, is rarely restful. It's often plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams. Dreams of food, of course, but also dreams of escape, of violence, of strange, warped versions of your old life. You wake up feeling more tired than when you went to sleep, the anxieties of the day seamlessly bleeding into the landscape of your subconscious. It's another form of depletion. Even your dreams are costing you energy. Historians still argue whether the long-term psychological effects of siege-induced trauma are more damaging to a population's recovery than the physical destruction. Can a city rebuild its spirit as easily as it rebuilds its buildings? The scars on the mind are harder to see, harder to quantify, but they can linger for generations, influencing everything from social cohesion to economic activity. For you right now, the debate feels irrelevant. You're just trying to get through the next hour without succumbing to a full-blown panic attack triggered by the thought of your water ration running out. The internal dialogue can be brutal. Your inner voice, usually a helpful companion, can turn into a relentless critic, pointing out every failure, every mistake, every reason why things are hopeless. You have to actively work to silence it, to push back against the tide of negativity. It's a constant, tiring battle waged entirely within the confines of your own skull. Sometimes you try talking to yourself out loud just to hear another voice, any voice, break the internal monologue. But then you worry someone might hear you, and the thought of being overheard talking to yourself in the dark silence of a besieged city is somehow even more depressing. Better to stick to quiet contemplation, as miserable as it is. This is the core of siege survival. The quiet internal part that doesn't make the history books as easily as battles or starvation statistics. It's the endless management of fear, the rationing of hope, the struggle to maintain some semblance of sanity when the world outside, and increasingly the world inside, feels like it's falling apart. It's the quiet exhaustion that seeps into your bones, the mental fatigue that makes simple thoughts feel heavy and complex. It's the deep, personal, profoundly boring grind of simply existing under unimaginable pressure. The internal landscape, as we discovered in the previous section, can be pretty gnarly. It's the part of the siege they don't put on the postcards. But even in the bleakest of situations, life has a strange way of clinging on, sometimes in the smallest, most unexpected forms. And sometimes those small forms come in the shape of dry, dusty leaves that smell faintly of sunshine and forgotten fields. You stumble upon the stash. Perhaps it was hidden under a loose floorboard by the previous occupants, or maybe you traded something truly useless for it, like a broken comb or a philosophical debate with someone who was even hungrier than you. Whatever the origin, it's a small handful of dried mountain herbs, not tea as you knew it from the before times, steeped in carefully designed bags and flavored with artificial berries, but the real, wild, slightly bitter stuff. Oregano? Thyme? Some nameless, hardy mountain plant that decided to make a stand against the elements and ended up here, a forgotten potential beverage. Finding it feels disproportionately significant. It's not food, not fuel, not water, but it represents something else. Possibility. A moment of planned comfort in an unplanned existence. You save it, hoarding the potential warmth and aroma like a dragon with a single, slightly wilted gold coin. Tonight, though, the weight of the quiet dread feels heavy enough that you decide to deploy this tiny weapon against it. Gathering a minuscule amount of precious fuel, maybe a splinter of wood that fell off a table leg, or a few pages torn from a book you've already read 50 times. You know the plot better than your own medical history at this point. You manage to heat a small amount of water. The process is agonizingly slow, watching the flame lick tentatively at the pot, waiting for the water to achieve that grudging warmth. Every drop of water feels precious. Every calorie of heat feels earned. It's the opposite of convenience, the antithesis of instant gratification. It's boringly deliberate, but then you drop the dried leaves into the hot water, and something happens. A faint, almost forgotten aroma rises, earthy and green, cutting through the stale air of the room. It's the smell of the world outside this confinement, the world that still exists beyond the fortifications and the constant threat. It's a memory of sunshine, of rain on dusty paths, of quiet meadows where nothing was trying to kill you. You cup the makeshift mug in your hands, feeling the fragile warmth seep into your palms. It's not just heat, it's a connection to something living, something natural, something that isn't fear. You share the small amount, pouring half into another equally makeshift container for someone else in your small group. Maybe it's the person you have been huddled with, sharing silent anxieties. Sharing this small comfort is a quiet act of solidarity. There are no grand gestures here, no stirring speeches about resilience. Just two people, perhaps three, sitting in the dim light, slowly sipping warm, slightly bitter water infused with mountain herbs. The taste is weak, perhaps even a little unpleasant if you were being honest in the before times. But here now, it's ambrosia. It's a tiny, tangible piece of normalcy in a world that is anything but normal. And with the shared warmth and the faint aroma, the conversation drifts, inevitably, towards something other than the immediate grinding hardship. It turns to possibility. Have you heard the rumors? Someone down the street heard a different kind of artillery fire yesterday, further away than usual. Could that mean something? Old man Petrova swears he saw a bird he hasn't seen since spring. Maybe the weather is changing. Maybe that means something too. It's not news, not confirmed intelligence, just whispers, possibilities, tiny cracks in the wall of despair that allow a sliver of light to filter through. Historically, during sieges, information was often scarcer than food, and rumors became a vital, though unreliable, currency. The defenders of Leningrad during World War II, enduring one of the most brutal sieges in history, clung desperately to any scrap of information or rumor that suggested relief might be coming. Radio broadcasts were listened to with intense focus, and even the smallest, unconfirmed story of approaching Soviet forces could provide a crucial, temporary lift in morale. It highlights how, in the absence of certainty, the human mind will grasp onto anything that offers a narrative beyond impending doom. You discuss these faint possibilities in hushed tones. You know intellectually that they are probably nothing. The different sound of artillery could be 100 things. The bird could just be a lost bird who made a terrible life choice. But saying them out loud, sharing the possibility, makes them feel slightly more real. It's like blowing on a dying ember, trying to coax a tiny spark back to life. It's illogical, maybe even a little bit pathetic. But here, logic is a luxury you can rarely afford. A slightly quirkier tidbit about siege psychology involves the power of mundane objects to become imbued with immense significance. People would cling to small personal items, fragments of their old lives, as talismans against the chaos. Sometimes these were photos or letters, but other times it could be something as simple as a particular cup, a smooth stone, or a piece of patterned fabric. These items weren't valuable in a conventional sense, but they were anchors to identity and hope. Your small bag of dried herbs right now feels like that. It's more than just potential tea. It's a small, fragile piece of your former world, a reminder that comfort and simple pleasure once existed and might, conceivably, exist again. It's certainly better than trying to start a philosophical debate with a hungry person. Trust me on that one, it rarely ends well. Historians still argue whether the propagation of rumors during a siege ultimately helps or harms morale. Does offering false hope cushion the blow of reality, or does it make the eventual disappointment even more crushing? For you, right now, the question is academic. The warmth of the weak herbal tea, the shared silence broken by cautious whispers of maybe, feels like a lifeline, however thin. It's not a solution, not a rescue, not even a decent cup of tea, but it's a pause in the relentless grind. A tiny pocket of calm in the psychological storm. And sometimes, in a siege, a tiny pocket of calm feels like winning the lottery. A very, very boring lottery where the prize is not feeling utterly miserable for 5 minutes. You finish the last sip. The container is empty, the warmth is fading, and the reality of the siege settles back in. But for a few minutes, the silence felt less oppressive, the hunger less sharp, the future slightly less like a guaranteed dead end. It was just warm water and some weeds, shared with someone else just as tired and scared as you. But it was enough. Enough to remind you that hope, like those hardy mountain herbs, can sometimes find a way to grow even in the harshest conditions. Even if it's just the hope that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow won't be quite as awful as today. Which, let's be honest, is peak hopefulness in a situation like this. Aiming high, as always. The brief warmth from the herbal infusion fades, leaving the chill of the room feeling somehow sharper than before. The flicker of possibility ignited by shared rumors shrinks back into the shadows. You are left with the relentless, boring truth of your physical state. It's not the dramatic, movie-style suffering, all gaunt faces and collapsing bodies, though there is some of that too. No, for the most part, it's a low-grade, persistent misery that simply wears you down, calorie by missing calorie. Your body feels heavy, dull. Every movement requires conscious effort. Lifting a hand feels like lifting a small, slightly reluctant brick. Walking across the room to check the almost empty water barrel feels like embarking on a minor expedition. Your joints ache with a chronic, damp-induced stiffness that no amount of stretching seems to alleviate. Your muscles feel soft, wasted, protesting even the simplest tasks. You find yourself spending long periods simply sitting, conserving energy, the act of being becoming the primary activity. The hunger is a constant companion, a dull throb in your gut that never quite goes away. It's not the sharp, agonizing pangs of the first few days, which paradoxically felt more active, more like a fight. This is a deeper, more ingrained hunger, a systemic plea from every cell in your body for resources you simply don't have. It dulls your senses, making taste weaker, smells less distinct, sounds muffled. Everything is filtered through this gray fog of caloric deficit. Your brain feels sluggish, thick, like trying to think through cotton wool. Concentration is a luxury. Remembering simple things like what day it is or what you were just about to do requires significant mental effort, like trying to haul a heavy sack uphill. This pervasive physical discomfort bleeds into everything. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and shallow, disturbed by the cold, the hard floor, the aches, and the internal gnawing. Waking up doesn't bring rest, just a continuation of the fatigue. Your skin feels dry and stretched, your hair is lank, your nails brittle. Your body is slowly, systematically shutting down non-essential operations, prioritizing mere existence over comfort or vitality. It's not glamorous, this slow decline. It's just tiring, profoundly, soul-wearingly tiring, like running a marathon at half a step per hour. You attempt some small, mundane task to distract yourself, or perhaps just because it needs doing. Mending a worn patch on your threadbare coat with a piece of salvaged wire, or trying to coax a few more embers from the dying fire, or carefully sweeping the perpetual dust that seems to manifest from nowhere. Each task is an exercise in patience and low-level frustration. Your fingers are clumsy and cold. The materials you have are inadequate. The results are minimal, but you do it anyway because doing something, however insignificant, feels slightly less awful than doing absolutely nothing. Historically, prolonged starvation and malnutrition have had devastating effects on besieged populations, far beyond simple hunger. Conditions like scurvy, caused by lack of vitamin C, were rampant, leading to bleeding gums, weakened tissues, and eventually death. The famous siege of Kut al-Amara in World War I saw Ottoman forces surrounding a British garrison. As supplies dwindled, the soldiers suffered terribly from malnutrition and diseases like dysentery and scurvy, weakening them significantly before they eventually surrendered due to starvation. It wasn't just a lack of food, it was the lack of specific nutrients that systematically broke down the body's ability to function and resist illness. The mental toll of this constant physical deprivation is perhaps even harder to articulate. It fosters a kind of low-grade apathy. The things you cared about before don't seem to matter as much. Grand ideas shrink to the size of your next potential meal. The future feels less like something to plan for and more like a statistical probability of continued suffering. It requires immense mental effort to resist this pull towards resignation, to hold on to the memory of a different life, to manufacture even a tiny spark of hope or purpose. It's like constantly swimming against a slow but powerful current of despair, and your arms are already tired from hunger. A slightly quirkier side effect of severe calorie restriction and boredom can be strange, vivid dreams or even mild hallucinations. The mind, deprived of normal stimulation and nutrients, can begin to play tricks. People in prolonged sieges have reported seeing things that weren't there, hearing phantom sounds, or experiencing intensely realistic dreams that blurred the lines with reality. Your own thoughts can become looping, repetitive, fixated on trivial details, or impossible fantasies of food. It's a reminder that your brain, like your body, is struggling, and the line between reality and hallucination can become surprisingly thin when you haven't had a square meal in months, and the only entertainment is watching dust motes dance in the sliver of light. Historians still argue whether chronic, low-level suffering, like persistent hunger and cold, is psychologically harder to endure in the long run than acute, terrifying events, like artillery bombardments or close calls with violence. Does the human mind adapt better to constant discomfort, or does the sheer monotony and lack of respite grind you down more effectively? For you, navigating this specific gray reality, the question feels moot. You're just living through it, one ache, one dull thought, one empty moment at a time. It requires a kind of quiet, uncelebrated fortitude. The grit needed isn't for charging a barricade, it's for getting out of your freezing, damp spot on the floor and attempting to tie a loose shoelace that isn't even attached to a shoe anymore, just because the alternative is just sitting. So you sit or you perform your small, tedious tasks, feeling the weight of your own body, the slow erosion of your strength and vitality. The small comfort of the herbal tea is a fading memory, a tiny ripple on the vast, still surface of your discomfort. This is the boring, persistent core of siege survival. Not the moments of heroism or terror, but the endless, grinding reality of just trying to keep your own system functioning when it's screaming for resources you cannot provide. And it is, in its own quiet way, utterly exhausting. The most draining thing isn't the fear, it's the physical effort required to simply not cease to exist. That deep, pervasive weariness of Section 11, the kind that settles into your very bones and makes even the simplest thought feel like wading through mud, is the constant baseline. But sometimes it's momentarily superseded by a different kind of energy, the energy of desperate necessity. When the last scraps in your immediate hideout are gone, when the idea of another day without even a morsel of something tangible to put in your mouth becomes unbearable, you consider the risks. The dangers outside your immediate shelter are many and varied. The watchful eyes of the besiegers, the instability of bombed-out buildings, the possibility of running into other survivors who might be less than friendly. But the alternative is a slow, quiet fade into nothingness. And on some days, even a dangerous gamble feels preferable to that passive waiting game. So you prepare for a scavenging run. This isn't some thrilling adventure movie montage. It's a meticulous, nerve-wracking process of planning and caution. You check your meager defenses, that sharpened stick, that rusty pipe you carry. You layer on every piece of clothing you own, trying to ward off the chill that seems to bite deeper outside. You map out a potential route in your head, remembering which streets might be covered by sniper fire, which alleys might offer concealment, which buildings look like they might contain something useful without immediately collapsing on your head. It's like planning a trip to the grocery store, but the aisles are rubble, the prices are measured in mortal peril, and the checkout clerk might shoot you. A real 5-star shopping experience, let me tell you. Stepping outside is like entering a different world. The air is colder, sharper, carrying the pervasive scent of dust, dampness, and decay. The silence isn't truly silent. It's punctuated by the distant sounds of the siege, a faraway thud of artillery, the crackle of a fire somewhere in the distance, the unsettling cry of a stray dog. Every step echoes in the stillness, making you flinch and freeze, scanning your surroundings with eyes that feel too wide, too exposed. The ruined buildings loom on either side, hollowed-out shells with gaping windows like empty eye sockets, staring out at the desolation. Rubble is everywhere: brick, plaster, twisted metal, broken glass, making walking a slow, deliberate process of picking your way through the debris field. It's great for working on ankle flexibility, I guess. Every cloud. The potential dangers are invisible until they aren't. A sudden glint from a high window could be a sniper scope. A shadow moving in a doorway could be a patrol or another desperate survivor. The ground beneath you could be unstable, hiding a collapsed cellar. You stick to the edges of buildings, using them for cover, darting across open spaces with your heart hammering against your ribs. It's a constant tension, a low-grade hum of fear that prevents you from truly relaxing even for a second. Your senses are on high alert, straining to pick up any unusual sound, any sign of movement. You move slowly, deliberately, trying to blend into the gray landscape, feeling incredibly vulnerable and exposed. Entering a building feels like a temporary reprieve from the open danger, but introduces new anxieties. Is anyone else inside? Is it structurally sound? You move cautiously through the interiors, the air thick with the smell of stale air and dust. You search systematically, room by room, going through what's left of people's lives. Empty cupboards, overturned furniture, scattered belongings, reminders of a hasty departure or a violent intrusion. You look for anything: canned goods that might have been overlooked, dried beans or grains in shattered containers, old medicine that might still be usable, though that's a risky gamble you usually avoid, scraps of fabric, pieces of wood for fuel. Most of what you find is useless, broken, or ruined. It's like sifting through a landfill, hoping to find a winning lottery ticket, except the ticket is a half-eaten block of dubious cheese. Historically, scavenging was a critical, albeit perilous, part of survival in many urban sieges. During the brutal siege of Leningrad in World War II, with official rations dwindling to almost nothing, civilians risked their lives daily to find anything edible. People would scavenge for scraps of food, dig up frozen potatoes from gardens, strip wallpaper for the cellulose paste, and even resort to eating household pets or inedible materials. The city became a landscape of desperate foraging, often under constant bombardment and in sub-zero temperatures. This wasn't just searching, It was a fight for the absolute basic fuel needed to keep the body barely functioning. You find small, mundane things: a chipped mug that isn't broken, a piece of rope, a slightly rusty but still functional pair of pliers. These small finds feel like triumphs in the moment, tiny victories against the overwhelming scarcity. You pocket them carefully, knowing that even something as simple as a length of rope can be incredibly useful. Then you come across something slightly more significant, perhaps a forgotten jar of pickles at the back of a pantry, or a few dry biscuits that somehow escape the attention of others. It's not a feast, not even a meal, but it's something. A tiny addition to the dwindling larder, a postponement of the inevitable. A slightly quirkier aspect of historical scavenging in desperate times involved not just finding food, but finding anything that could be repurposed. During the Paris Commune in 1871, under siege by the French government forces, Parisians became incredibly inventive scavengers, turning everything from old newspapers into fuel to recycling scrap metal for makeshift weapons. There are accounts of people meticulously collecting discarded bone fragments to try and extract any remaining nutritional value by boiling them for days. This level of ingenuity, born of pure necessity, turning absolute garbage into a resource, is both fascinating and deeply depressing. Historians still argue whether extensive individual scavenging efforts in sieges were ultimately beneficial or detrimental to the besieged population as a whole. Did they prolong survival by supplementing meager official rations? Or did they exacerbate chaos, encourage selfishness, and lead to increased casualties due to exposure and violence during foraging trips? For you trudging through the rubble, the question is academic. You're not thinking about the macro-level survival strategy. You're just thinking about finding enough to make it through another day, about the quiet gnawing in your stomach, about the cold seeping into your boots, and the constant low thrum of fear that is now just another part of the boring, exhausting routine. It's a purely personal calculus, risk detection by the enemy versus the certainty of slow starvation back at the shelter. A real Sophie's choice. If Sophie was deciding between getting shot and getting really, really hungry, you gather your meager finds, securing them in your worn sack. The weight is negligible, a sad testament to the poverty of your haul. The journey back is just as tense as the journey out. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant sound, sending a jolt of anxiety through you. You retrace your steps, constantly scanning, constantly alert. Finally, you reach the relative safety of your shelter, slipping back inside, pulling the makeshift barricade behind you. You lean against the cold wall, catching your breath, the tension slowly bleeding out of your muscles, leaving behind the familiar, bone-deep exhaustion and the cold. You didn't find it much. You risked your life for scraps, but you found something. And in this world, that's enough to keep you going for another little while, another small postponement. You hold the key, the warmth of tiny sun in your numb hands. It's not a steaming mug of cocoa or a comforting bowl of chicken noodle soup, obviously. It's a meager portion of brownish, slightly cloudy liquid, but right now it feels like liquid gold. You bring it slowly towards your face, breathing in that faint, smoky, sort of animal smell. It's not appetizing in the way a steak is appetizing. It's appetizing in the way that anything with calories is appetizing when you haven't eaten properly in weeks. It smells like desperation, seasoned with just a hint of wood smoke and goat. Yum. 5 stars. Would starve again for this aroma. The surface of the broth is still, reflecting the dim gray light. You can see tiny flecks floating in it, maybe bits of bone or char from the smoking process, or just general siege debris. You don't care. Your focus is solely on the warmth, the promise of something entering your empty stomach. Your lips touch the rim of the cup, which is rough and slightly chipped. It's surprisingly cold against your skin, a contrast to the heat radiating from the liquid inside. Taking the first sip is an event in itself. It's small, careful. The liquid is thin, almost watery, but warmer than you expected. It slides over your tongue. The flavor, well, it's subtle, very, very subtle. There's a smoky note first, then a faint underlying gamminess, that reminds you this did, in fact, come from a goat that was likely smoked over a meager fire. There's also a hint of malt, just enough to register. It's not rich, it's not complex, it's not delicious by any normal standard. But it is warm, and it is something. You swallow the first sip. It goes down easily, leaving a faint warmth in your throat and a vague sense of something. It certainly doesn't feel like food. It feels like warm, slightly flavored water. But that warmth, that simple act of swallowing something other than your own saliva or rainwater, feels profoundly significant. You take another slightly larger sip this time, trying to find more flavor, trying to convince yourself it's more than it is. It remains stubbornly boring. Smoky, watery, hint of goat. That's the whole flavor profile. It's the culinary equivalent of beige paint. In many historical sieges, the desperation for any form of sustenance led people to consume things we would find unthinkable today. While boiling bones for broth was common, accounts exist of people eating grass, tree bark, candles made from animal fat, or even less savory things. The line between food and not food became blurred, defined solely by whether or not it could potentially stave off starvation for another day. This broth, while unexciting, is practically a gourmet meal compared to some of the things people were forced to consume in places like Leningrad during its siege, where they resorted to eating carpentry glue or boiling leather. Makes your smoky goat water seem positively decadent, doesn't it? You continue to sip slowly, letting the warmth spread through your chest. It's not enough to make you feel full or energetic, or even remotely satisfied in a lasting way. But it takes the edge off the immediate, gnawing emptiness just a little. It's a temporary truce with your hunger. The physical effect is minimal, almost negligible, but the psychological impact is disproportionately large. You've had something. You are slightly less empty than you were a few minutes ago. That small victory is something to hold on to. A quirky or perhaps just deeply sad tidbit from survival lore. In extreme starvation, the body begins to break down its own tissues, including muscle and organ tissue, for energy. This can lead to a deceptive feeling of fullness as the stomach shrinks and the body cannibalizes itself internally. So while this broth isn't filling you up with external calories, at least you know any feeling of fullness isn't due to your own body eating itself. Hooray, you finish the last sip. The cup feels lighter now, empty. The warmth is fading from your hands. The brief respite is over. You place the cup carefully back on the ground beside you. The hunger is still there, of course, a dull ache that settles back in with quiet persistence. But for a few minutes, you had the warmth, the faint flavor, the small comfort. Historians still argue whether the psychological benefits of small, regular food rations in a siege situation outweighed the potentially more practical approach of consolidating resources for larger, less frequent distributions. Did the routine and the morale boost of a daily or semi-daily ration, however small, help people endure longer than if they had to wait days between larger, more impactful meals? It's hard to say definitively without a time machine and a really morbid controlled experiment. But holding that warm cup, you lean towards the idea that the psychological lift was worth something. You settle back into your space, pulling your thin blanket tighter. The warmth from the broth is already dissipating, leaving only a faint memory on your tongue and a fleeting feeling in your stomach. But the emptiness feels slightly different now, not gone, not even significantly reduced, but perhaps acknowledged. You fed the void, however minimally. And in this situation, any acknowledgement is better than none. You close your eyes, trying to hold on to the last wisps of warmth, the faint, boring taste of survival. The brief warmth has faded, a fleeting ghost in your gut. The hunger returns almost immediately, not with a roar, but a persistent low hum, like a faulty refrigerator you can't unplug. It's a familiar companion now, this emptiness. It doesn't demand attention with sharp pangs so much as it just is. A dull ache that permeates everything, making every movement feel a little heavier, every thought a little slower. The boring broth provided a moment of distraction, a brief 2-minute vacation from the gnawing reality, but the vacation is decidedly over. You're left with the cold, the damp, and the immense crushing boredom of siege life. Survival isn't always a dramatic, action-packed movie montage. Most of the time, it's just waiting. Waiting for something to happen. Waiting for rations. Waiting for the shelling to stop. Waiting for sleep. Waiting for it all to end one way or another. And waiting, it turns out, is incredibly boring. You've already inventoried every crack in the wall, memorized the patterns in the damp patches on the ceiling, and counted the loose stones in the floor more times than you can count. There's nowhere to go, nothing to do on them, no one to talk to in a meaningful way because everyone is trapped in their own quiet despair. So your focus shifts, as it often does when there's nothing internal demanding immediate attention, to the external world, the sounds that filter in from beyond your meager shelter. Siege is never truly silent, not even at night. The wind is always there, a mournful sigh around the broken structures, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. But underneath the wind, or sometimes cutting sharply through it, are the sounds of the siege itself. There's the distant thump of artillery firing. Often so far away, it sounds like the world sighing a heavy metallic sound. Then, seconds or sometimes a minute later, the faint rumbling boom as the shell lands somewhere in the city. You've learned to gauge the distance by the time between the flash, if you can see it, or the firing sound and the impact sound. Closer impacts register as sharp cracks and concussions that shake the very ground you lie on, but tonight most seem to be far off. It's a grim lullaby, the city breathing fire and thunder in its sleep. Then there are the smaller sounds, the sporadic crackle of distant gunfire, often individual shots rather than sustained bursts. Snipers? Skirmishes? You don't know and you don't dwell on it. It's just part of the background noise, like traffic in a normal city, but infinitely more dangerous. There's the scuttling and scratching sounds within the walls. Rats, always rats, the other survivors in this concrete jungle. They are bolder now, sensing the general weakness and desperation. Sometimes you hear them squeak or fight in the darkness. Pleasant. Historians still argue whether the constant psychological stress of unpredictable shelling and violence in a siege was more damaging to civilian morale and health than the slow, steady attrition of starvation and disease. Was the fear of sudden death worse than the certainty of slow decline? It's a morbid thought experiment, one you're living through the practical application of. Right now, you'd probably vote for starvation being slightly less anxiety-inducing than being vaporized by an unexpected mortar round. But it's a close race. The silence between the sounds can be almost worse than the noise. It feels like the city is holding its breath, waiting, and you are waiting with it. Waiting for the next thump, the next boom, the next moment when you have to tense up and hope whatever's falling isn't falling on you. This constant state of low-level alert is exhausting in itself. Even when you're not actively scared, your body is primed, ready to react. It drains you, physically and mentally, just as effectively as hunger or cold. A quirky tidbit: during the siege of Paris in 1870 to 71, with food supplies dwindling, the city's zoo animals were slaughtered and sold for meat. Restaurants offered exotic dishes like elephant consommé, camel roast, and cat pate. So while your smoked goat broth might be boring, at least you're not contemplating whether you could stomach fluffy a la carte. Although, given enough time and hunger, let's not go there. As the hours drag on, the cold seems to deepen. It seeps into your bones, a damp chill that no amount of huddling can entirely dispel. Sleep becomes the only real escape. It's not rest in the traditional sense, more a temporary shutdown, a brief suspension of consciousness until hunger, cold, or noise jolts you awake again. Preparing for sleep involves little more than finding the least uncomfortable position on the cold floor, pulling your thin blanket tight around you, and trying to block out the world. You shift, trying to ease the ache in your hip. The floor is hard and uneven. Every tiny pebble and crack seems to press into your skin. You try to remember the feeling of a soft bed, a warm room, a full stomach. It feels like remembering a dream, something that couldn't possibly have been real. This is reality now. Cold floor, empty stomach, sounds of war outside. Remember that moss bread ration you had days ago? It felt substantial at the time, didn't it? Solid, chewy, earthy. This broth felt like a pale imitation of sustenance. But even the memory of something solid is a comfort. You cling to these tiny anchors of past experiences, these small memories of what normal felt like, to ground yourself against the tide of monotony and hardship. You close your eyes, focusing on controlling your breathing, trying to ignore the rumble of your stomach and the distant echoes of violence. Just breathe. Just wait. Just sleep. The sounds of the siege begin to recede, not with a sudden halt, but a gradual softening, like a radio station fading out as you drive further away. The distant artillery thumps and booms become less frequent, the sharp cracks of gunfire fewer and further between. The wind is still there, sighing its endless, mournful tune around the broken city, but even that seems to settle into a less insistent murmur. It's as if the city and the forces surrounding it are finally succumbing to exhaustion, settling into a tense, uneasy truce for the night. The quiet isn't truly silent, of course. There's the constant, low hum of your own body, the faint beating of your heart against the floor, the soft whoosh of breath in your ears, the gurgle and rumble of an empty stomach reminding you that the smoked goat broth, while a lovely thought, was a momentary distraction, not a meal. Remember that distinct, vaguely metallic taste? It's already a fading memory, leaving only the persistent emptiness behind. The rats are still scuttling in the walls, their tiny feet and occasional squeaks a reminder that the night belongs to the resilient, the desperate, and the utterly pragmatic. Survival, after all, isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's just being small, quiet, and good at finding crumbs in the dark. With the external world quieting down, your focus turns inward, a retreat into the only territory you still have any control over, your own mind and body. You try to arrange your limbs into a position that minimizes contact with the cold, hard floor. Pull the thin blanket tighter around your shoulders. Tuck your hands inside your shirt for warmth. Small ritualistic movements designed to create a tiny bubble of relative comfort in a sea of discomfort. It's like trying to build a sandcastle against an incoming tide with a single rusty spoon. The cold is the most immediate reality now. It's a deep, penetrating chill that seems to emanate from the very stones of the building. It settles in your joints, makes your muscles ache, and turns your breath into faint plumes of mist in the frigid air. You try to curl into a tighter ball, seeking warmth from your own body, a futile exercise when your core temperature is already hovering somewhere south of toasty. It makes you appreciate radiators and insulation in a way you never thought possible. Like seriously, who needs a fancy car when you could have a consistently warm room and a never-ending supply of lukewarm tap water? Ah, the dreams of the besieged. To combat the discomfort and the persistent dull ache of hunger, you try to slow your breathing. Inhale slowly through your nose, hold for a moment, exhale slowly through your mouth. It's a technique recommended for everything from managing stress to falling asleep. And while it doesn't magically make you warm or full, it provides a focal point. It's something active you can do when everything else is beyond your control. Each slow breath is a small act of defiance against the chaos and hardship. It's a way of saying, I am still here, I am still breathing. Historians still argue whether the mental fortitude required to endure long periods of passive suffering, like a siege, was more taxing than the active stress of combat. Was waiting and enduring harder on the human psyche than fighting? Right now, lying here cold and hungry, waiting for sleep, the case for passive suffering feels pretty strong. You wouldn't exactly call this a spa retreat. As you breathe, you try to clear your mind, but it's like trying to sweep dust in a strong wind. Thoughts drift in, memories of food, memories of warmth, anxieties about tomorrow, worries about loved ones you haven't seen or heard from. It's a chaotic jumble. You try to gently push them away, focusing again on the rhythm of your breath. Inhale, exhale. A quirky tidbit. During the siege of Leningrad, the city's citizens created vast networks of underground tunnels to move supplies and people safely, effectively creating a hidden, subterranean city beneath the bombarded streets. They were astonishingly resourceful, making do with absolutely nothing. Makes you feel slightly less impressive for just trying to breathe slowly on a cold floor, doesn't it? Though credit where credit is due, breathing is pretty fundamental to survival. Occasionally, a thought slips through that you can't easily dismiss. What happens in the morning? Will the shelling start again? Will there be a ration distribution? Will anything change? This is where the fight against despair truly lies. It's in the quiet moments like these, when the adrenaline of active danger has faded, that the sheer hopelessness of the situation can weigh most heavily. It's a heavy blanket of gray, threatening to smother any spark of optimism. But even in the deepest darkness, there is often a faint glimmer, the hope of morning, the simple, irrational belief that a new day might bring something better. It's not a grand hope, not a belief in imminent rescue or a sudden feast. It's a tiny, stubborn ember, the hope that the sun will rise, that you will see it, and that maybe, just maybe, today will be slightly less awful than yesterday. It's the kind of hope that keeps you from just giving up and letting the cold take you. It's a boring kind of hope, really, not the stuff of epic movies, just the quiet, persistent hope of boring, continued existence. Like hoping your questionable canned goods haven't expired too much. You continue to breathe, focusing on the sensation of the cool air entering your nostrils, the slightly warmer air leaving your mouth. The world outside continues its hushed, watchful silence. The discomfort is still there, a dull ache in your limbs, a hollowness in your gut, the persistent chill. But as you focus on your breath, as the minutes stretch on in the darkness, these sensations begin to feel less urgent, less demanding. They become part of the background noise, like the distant wind or the scuttling rats. Sleep, when it finally comes, it is a deep, restorative plunge into unconsciousness. It's more like drifting on the surface of a cold, dark lake, tethered to the shore by discomfort and vigilance. But it is sleep nonetheless, a brief, temporary escape. A moment where the hunger fades, the cold recedes, and the sounds of siege are replaced by the merciful silence of dreams. Or perhaps just nothingness. You hold on to that tiny, fragile hope for the morning. You breathe, and you wait for the gray veil of sleep to finally descend. Just a few more breaths. Focus. Let go. The sounds have almost entirely faded now. Just the wind, a distant, lonely whisper. Your breathing becomes shallower, softer. The edges of your awareness blur. The cold is still there, a part of the stone you lie upon, but it no longer feels sharp, just present. The hunger is a dull echo. Let it all go. You are safe for this moment, curled in the darkness. Nothing is falling. No one is shouting. Just the quiet, the cold, and your fading consciousness. Drift now. Let the thoughts unravel, the worries dissipate. The morning will come, but not yet. Rest now. Let the heavy blanket of sleep pull you down into the quiet. Deeper, softer, letting go. Good night.